So one thing I in this article, it talks about no apologies. So, and it does specifically say Democrats, but I'm going to let Janet go on with this. What do you think about apologies from politicians about all this, Janet?
Well, from the very start, I feel like it's all the above are responsible. There's very few that have spoke out publicly to talk about the truth of the matter or been bold enough to say what they feel or think. And so I think that the responsibility is on all shoulders that chose, whether they believed it or not, to take any responsibility for their position, because it's not, I mean, we're talking about children, but in my circumstance, I feel like the elderly were put in prison.
Oh,
and the stories that my mother can tell me is heart-wrenching. So we have young teen boys that made it through, and they were at the end. Our youngest was at the very end, and he survived getting through it. But at the same time, if you make a mistake as a politician, a lot of times it's just, oh well, and they still have your job. But in your case, because you chose to stand up for something that you totally believed in, and I'm sure you did it in a very respectful manner and way, somehow you became public enemy number one.
I did. None of it mattered. The arc of your life doesn't matter. The things that you've done, the things you've achieved, and, not just in the context of the business and everything I had done at Levi's to help bring that brand back, but how I had treated the people there who I worked with, helped build careers with and for, and in conjunction with friends, life. I had friends at Levi's over 20 years. I went to weddings and baby showers and even funerals. Like, these people were in my life, and it didn't matter. I took this one stance that veered from the mainstream narrative, which was the Democrat narrative. Let's be clear, as it pertains to, because I agree with you, no politicians on any side of the fence apologize for anything. But when it comes to lockdowns and school closures and mandates and all of it, those were Democratic-led policies that were discriminatory and harmful. And while there's some acknowledgement now that they were harmful, it is all sort of in the context of, it was the fog of war, we couldn't have known. They didn't do anything wrong. And here's the thing. We did know. I knew. And I'm just like a regular mom. And I read the data, and I obsessively read every study. And I knew that not only was this going to be ineffective, but that we were asking children to carry the heaviest burden when they were at the least risk, if any. And it should never have been a math problem. This was an ethics challenge. And what we decided was, I believe, a moral abomination to ask children to shield the rest of the world and carry this burden. We are supposed to protect them, not the other way around. In the CDC's pre-pandemic playbook, schools are never supposed to close for more than a few weeks at a time, even for something with a much, much higher fatality rate, because the harms are too great. And other countries chose the right way. Not just Sweden, who never shut primary schools, but Denmark, I think after only 3 weeks, reopened the schools because they said it's too harmful to children. It's too harmful to essential workers who need to work. And so, no one's ever going to admit that they were wrong, because it's horrible. I mean, the harms are just too egregious. And yet, someone like me who dared to say it, who dared to say that school closures were going to be harmful before the New York Times and CNN admitted it, was made an example of. And, the names that were called at a certain point in this process of me contesting school closures, it became very clear that I was not going to stop. I was asked so many times and didn't. It was kind of clear. And yet, pillaring me, dragging me in the public square and calling me every sort of horrible name that you could think of. And it was done in very public company-wide meetings. It certainly discouraged anyone else from speaking out, because who wants to put themselves in that position of being ostracized, possibly losing their job, the lockdowners, the lockdown forever crowd, and the keep the schools closed forever crowd, they position themselves as having the moral high ground. And the rest of us who dared dissent as evil, murderous, alt-right, psychopaths. And so who's going to volunteer to be in that group? In the beginning, I tried to defend myself and explain why I wasn't those things. I stopped doing it because I realized they didn't really want to have a conversation. They wanted to vilify me so everybody else would stay quiet, and it worked. That is how consensus was manufactured. There was never consensus amongst doctors or just everyday folks that this was the right path. But if you silence everybody that asks a question, it does appear there is consensus, which is, what happened.